As previously, 9 deputies have submitted matters under Standing Order 27A, which will be listed in the official debate. And the first topical issue is in the name of Deputy Holly Cairns to discuss Ireland's commitments to climate action at this COP26.
Thank you, Lascia Corla, for including this important issue for today's topicals. The importance of the UN Climate Change Conference, or COP26 as it's also known, can't be overstated. Speaking at the World Leaders Summit opening, Elizabeth Wahuti, a climate activist from Kenya, outlined the realities for those living on the front lines of climate change, facing droughts, famine, and deteriorating living conditions. She gave a very clear message. The decisions you make here will help determine whether children will have food and water. The children cannot live on words and empty promises. They are waiting for you to act. It's no exaggeration to say this meeting is essential to prevent the worst effects of climate change by ensuring that global temperature rise is limited to 1.5 degrees. This will need emissions to be reduced by 45% by 2030 compared to 2010, and from there to net zero emissions by 2050. As Elizabeth said, this conference has to be about action, not words. Most states, including Ireland, have not done enough to meet vital climate targets. I do welcome the Taoiseach's commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 51% by 2030 and to be climate neutral by 2050, but I have to do so with scepticism. Our greenhouse gas emissions decreased by 3.6% last year, which can be attributed to the significant decrease in transport and economic activity across lockdowns. It was an indication of the massive change necessary in the next 9 years if we are to reduce our emissions by 51%. Moreover, we failed to meet our 2020 target. Instead of 20% below 2005 levels, we achieved 7%. Ireland is a small country on a global scale, but we produce a disproportionate amount of emissions, and we have to take responsibility for our fair share. Minister, I'm sure you'll cite the forthcoming Climate Action Plan. However, we've already seen lobbyists and big players seeking exemptions for their sectors. This is against the backdrop of the historic climate case ruling last year, when the previous government's National Mitigation Plan failed to comply with the requirements of the Climate Action Act 2015. The Climate Action Plan will need to be an incredibly ambitious and incredibly detailed plan if it is to achieve what we need to. Most importantly, our climate action must be grounded in a just transition. This means a transition that ensures the economic and social consequences of the climate emergency are managed to maximise opportunities of decent work for all, reducing inequalities, promoting social justice and supporting industries, workers and communities affected. However, you'll have to excuse my deep worry that this will not happen. Minister, you and your party refuse to accept the need for a more robust definition of just transition in the Climate Action Bill. And more recently, there has been an abandoning of the programme for government commitment to establish the Just Transition Commissioner as a statutory office. These are deeply worrying developments and offer very little reassurance to the prospect of a fair and just fight for climate and social justice. Speaking at COP26, Sir David Attenborough said, "This story is one of inequality as well as instability. Today, those who have done the least to cause this problem are among those to be hit hardest." Minister, this week when climate decisions have never been more significant and attention is focused on the issue, what assurances can you give me that your government will do everything necessary to achieve the massive changes necessary and that they will occur in a fair and just manner?
Lascia Corla and Deputy, thank you very much. Ireland is committed to concerted global action to address the climate crisis, and Ireland engages in negotiations under the UNFCCC on climate change and the Paris Agreement through its membership of the EU. Ireland has actively engaged with EU partners in preparation for the 26th conference, the COP26 in Glasgow, which commenced on the 31st of October and will continue until the 12th of November. The Taoiseach is attending the World Leaders Summit to deliver the national statement, and this will set out how Ireland is contributing to achievement of the Paris goals, including limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees and to helping developing and vulnerable countries to mitigate the impacts of climate change. The Minister for the Environment, Climate and Communications will lead Ireland's national delegation for the continuation of the high-level segment during the second week of COP26. Ireland is committed to playing an active and constructive role at the COP this year, particularly on issues linked to our climate priorities and with the intention of illustrating the coherency between our international climate agenda and our domestic climate ambition. The latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report Climate Change 2021, the physical science basis, reconfirms the limited window in which there is to act to prevent more devastating impacts of climate change and underlines the increasing urgency needed to tackle the climate crisis. This report, based on the latest climate science, has observed unprecedented changes in the climate system. Every region of the world across the entire climate system has already been impacted by climate extremes. There is even greater certainty about climate change and even greater urgency about the need to tackle it. The role of human influence is undisputed. It has resulted in warming of the atmosphere, ocean and land, and the report reinforces and builds on the existing evidence which links extreme weather events to climate change. Some changes, such as the rise in sea level, are irreversible. They're leaving low-lying lands and coastal communities extremely vulnerable. This scientific evidence demonstrates that the atmosphere is warming and the climate is changing with each passing year. This year's COP is crucial in ensuring that climate action is taken in a manner that balances considerations of fairness, cost-effectiveness and solidarity, ensuring that no one is left behind. It is critical that despite the challenges that COVID present to a global gathering of this nature, that COP26 be both as inclusive and transparent as possible. And this is reflected in the makeup of our own national delegation, which reflects our citizen participatory approach to climate action and the promotion and participation of women, young people and NGOs in the negotiators and observer groups. It is also reflected in our national negotiation priorities. A primary objective is the finalisation of the Paris Rulebook, which will allow for the full delivery of the Paris Agreement. This includes consensus on matters such as carbon markets, Article 6, transparency, climate finance and adaptation, and these are called for by developing countries. Climate finance has enabled us to support people in the least developed countries, the LDCs, and small island developing states. It has enabled us to amplify the voices of these countries in climate change decision-making. Ireland will support LDCs and SIDS at COP26 and in preparation for a climate-resilient future, standing in solidarity with countries that have done the least to contribute to the problem of climate change and yet face the harshest impacts. Agreement on a way forward for future finance discussions, solution-forward approaches to address loss and damage, and the scaling up of support to enhance action on adaptation are also key deliverables. And so, in summary, we're committed to realising the goals of the Paris Agreement, championing progressive action and ensuring that the most vulnerable are at the heart of our engagement. Ireland has a strong commitment and a track record on providing balanced share of climate financing going to adaptation and to the inclusion of grant-based finance for LDCs and SIDS. At the UN General Assembly in September, Ireland launched the Champions Group on adaptation finance, together with Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, Finland and the UK, and this group plans to advocate to other donor countries on increasing the quality, quantity and accessibility of climate adaptation finance, specifically to meet the $100 billion goal. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. I kind of accept your commitment, but I remain sceptical, and you didn't address the abandoning in the programme for government commitment to establish a Just Transition Commissioner. Our annual transition statements highlight the inadequacies of action so far. Our society and economy need massive change. It's possible, and it's something that can and should be done. We need the government to take substantial and brave leadership, and we need a unified approach. Regrettably, in response to the Climate Action Advisory Council's report, we saw the same old narrative of climate action versus rural Ireland. Farmers know that we need climate action, and they are among the cohort most vulnerable in Ireland, and they deserve more respect. Policies over recent decades have decimated small family farms, and those clinging to a business-as-usual model are putting us at considerable risk and are squandering opportunities to protect rural living, spinning the false narrative that this current model favours farmers when it does not. It favours big agribusiness, the likes of Larry Goodman and supermarkets. Alana Rinn, a young climate activist from Clonakilty, summed it up. This idea that a division between activists and farmers shouldn't be there at all. With a just transition to a more sustainable way of food production, it's important that farmers are given the opportunity to become educated about it and they actually have financial support. And I think she summed it up. At present, the system is not in place to support farmers. It's there to incentivise them to do the opposite of take climate action. You know as well as I do, Minister, that small environmental pilot schemes through the Department of Agriculture is not going to cut it in relation to the targets that we need to meet. And then the COP26 commitments on deforestation are very welcome, but how are we going to meet them when we have serious backlogs in forestry licences here in Ireland? Despite assurances from the Ministers for Agriculture last year when they passed this legislation around forestry that was very questionable, it very clearly hasn't resolved the problem. which restricts afforestation efforts and is preventing communities from planting trees. Like, how do you actually propose to end deforestation when it's taking 2 to 3 years to get a licence to plant trees in Ireland at the moment? In terms of transport, you know the scale of investment in accessible public transport and active travel, infrastructure needed in rural Ireland. You know, that hasn't been allocated for. We're not going far enough, and I think we all know that. Those are just 3 examples from a litany of sectoral issues that need to be addressed in an effective action plan. We need an ambitious plan, Minister, which will tackle vested interests, get all of government, civil society and private enterprise working towards our climate goals.
Minister, to conclude.
Thank you, Lascan Corla and Deputy. And I absolutely agree that casting this as a rural versus urban narrative is not helpful. And I think it's something that we can only solve by working together and by being constructive in our approach. And I want to thank Sinn Féin for dropping their wind farm bill, their private members bill, and for seeing that was the wrong thing to do, and for having the humility to change course on that.
Just Transition Commissioner.
So also I want to say to the Deputy that I agree that the lobbyists seeking exemptions has been counterproductive. I think that it has been something that has led to we've had sectoral lobbyists coming in looking for procrastination. I don't think it's been serving their members. I think it has actually led to things being more painful as a result. In terms of just transition, I don't think we can make progress on climate action without just transition. I don't think it's feasible or viable to get people to change unless they feel that those changes are fair. In terms of Clonakilty, I think that it is a town which has been leading in being progressive on green issues. I think it's a town that has shown that it is a thriving town in a rural area which has had business because it has become a place which is a fantastic environment to spend time and has brought people in. You've had your bike scheme and various other green measures that have led and have been more progressive than in some cities. In terms of the afforestation policies and the delays in getting forest planting, getting licences, I know that Minister of State Pippa Hackett has made great progress on that, and I believe that the metrics are showing that forestry licences are being granted much sooner than possible, much sooner than previously. If you have any further issues or questions on this that you want to ask me, my office is always open to you. Thank you very much.
Ag bogor raiguji an céad topical eile in anam a Barry Cowan.